Hey guys, it's Ink here. I wanted to bring you all another video. This is one of the most requested videos that I got asked for, so hopefully this will be helpful. Today I'm going to be talking about basically what is my personal risk stratification when I look at PE as a whole, evaluate the different exercises, and basically what do I think has the highest risk and what do I think has the lowest risk. A couple of kind of disclaimers, which I say every time. I'm not a PE or penis enlargement expert. I have done my research and I try to be helpful, but there is certainly a lot of room for debate. And so this is my personal opinion. These are based on my personal experiences and what I have read. This is by no means gospel. And so if you look on different forums, there's a potential for different information, different people viewing things in a different way. And so, please feel free to leave your comments, especially if you disagree with what I'm saying or straight up feel that something I'm saying is incorrect or inaccurate. This is just me doing the best I can to get, to get helpful information out there. A lot of this was compiled based on what I found on M9's A Gel for You safety ratings post. And so it's not like I copied that post, it's just that's what I used to kind of look at the different exercises. And it was very helpful to see how how that sub rated their safety exercises, and I compiled my own list, which is significantly different than theirs. But please go on A Gel for You and look in the wiki and check that out as well. The last thing I want to say is that none of these techniques are 100% safe. Okay, anytime you engage in PE, there is always the risk of injury. And so I've said this before, just make sure if you're considering doing PE that you understand that there is the risk of injury and you are willing to accept that. The last thing I'm going to say is that some of these percentages or risk stratification as far as what is the rate of injury, I'm pulling that out of my ass, guys. I mean, some of it is from the clients that I've spoken with and me guesstimating based off of that. But other than that, it's kind of impossible to know. But in general, I do think it's helpful to know whether something has a 1 in 10 risk of injury, in my opinion, or whether it has a 1 in 1,000 risk of injury. And so I put that information in there to try to help give you a gauge to base your information on. So all of those disclaimers out of the way. If you want to kind of follow along with this talk, if you go on our subreddit Getting Bigger, click on my profile. I'm the user Hinkle McCrinkleberry, and look at my pinned post database, and then scroll down to where it says basically injury prevention, and you'll see where it says my risk stratification for PE. That's what I'm basing this video off of. So let's get right into it. So I'm gonna go basically highest risk to lowest risk. And once again, this is just my opinion, but I think one of the absolute worst exercises out in the PE community is what we call the S2S or side to side stretch. I've made several posts about this. The danger is multiple folds. So number one, it's a dynamic movement. And so there's something that's called a static stretch, where let's say this is your PP here. You just pull and you put tension on it and you hold in one direction. Then you release, then you can pull in another direction and then release, okay? That's what I describe as a static stretch, meaning pull and hold, almost as if you were stretching your arm, okay? When you do the side to side or S2S stretch, you're pulling from side to side, okay? When you do dynamic movements like that, you increase your risk of injury. It's the same reason why people don't tell, not the exact same, because when we're talking about skeletal muscle, it is a different game. But in general, when you are doing a dynamic stretch, you increase your risk of injury. And so outside of an Olympic trained athlete in general, people advise you not to do dynamic stretching. And so the fact that you're just pulling and moving increases your risk of damage right there. There is also a very sensitive structure. It's called Alcock's canal. It sits at basically the base of the penis, right at the kind of the bottom of the pubis, or of the pubic structures. And what it is, it's a very narrow channel, and through there your pudendal artery goes through there, your pudendal nerve, pudendal vein, and it is subject to trauma. And so specifically there are published papers showing that you're subject to mechanical trauma, especially repetitive motions. And so when you are doing mechanical trauma and you are moving back and forth, you increase your risk damage to this structure in these areas. And so without a doubt, this story comes up all the time, in that a guy is doing side to side stretches and he felt a pop and all of a sudden his dick went numb or his dick hurt. It's very similar with jelqing, actually, is that they're doing jelqing, they felt a pop, then all of a sudden their dick goes limp. You have to avoid this stretch, and I don't know why it's still in guides. You know, there even is some people that come on and say, oh, I do S2S stretches as part of my routine. I'm not saying that any of these exercises are going to guarantee you are going to damage your dick. You could be a lucky guy, but in general, I would strongly advise anyone not to do side-to-side stretches or S2S for that reason. You're very much increasing your risk of hard flashes when you do this, okay? Along with that, traditional jelks. I'm not gonna belabor this point because BD made a pretty good video about why you shouldn't jelk. But a jelk is almost like a dynamic motion as well, because you are applying pressure and then gradually and increasing the pressure as you kind of go further up your dick. When you're doing that, it is cause rapid pressure changes that can damage a lot of the soft tissue structures in the penis. High rates of injury with that, without a doubt. Those are the 1 and 2 most common things I get asked about when I have my clients that need injury counseling. So please avoid these structures or these exercises, okay? Also, any type of penis enlargement surgery, okay? Without a doubt, there's even published papers showing that penis enlargement surgeries are unethical because of the high rates of complications associated with them, and they are often done in people who don't have actual pathologically small penises. So I made a whole post also on my database on why you should never consider any type of enlargement surgery if that's what you're looking for, and all of the different risks that are associated with it. One caveat to that is potentially the P-shot. It has yet to be determined how effective this is going to be, but that is one thing that I think is actually a pretty low risk procedure. One of these that I had in a high risk category that I actually think I would move down to the lower risk category is actually a noose extender. When you use a noose extender, you are, with the silicone strap that they use that goes over your phallus, it can cause almost asphyxiation of the penis that way, depending on how long you leave it. And so it can actually restrict blood flow, but also it can put increased pressure on some of those nerves that run along the dorsal surface of the penis. And so you can get either basically ischemic changes or like loss of blood causing damage to the tissue in that area, or you can actually have nerve damage. And so when I have a client that calls me about numbness, I'd probably say 9 times out of 10 it's from a noose extender. That being said, if you actually look at some of those studies that I published, that I recently talked about online, proving that penis enlargement is possible, they were done using noose extenders, and the rates of injury using a noose extender for 4 to 6 hours per day were markedly low. I mean, there's almost no person on those studies that had any kind of significant damage. There were a few people in those studies that actually had enough damage that they had to drop out of the study and they weren't included in the final analysis. So that's not to be taken lightly. However, for the vast majority of people, minor complications. So that pretty much sums up like the high risk. And so when I say high risk, I would say there's a 1 in 10 chance that you're going to get some kind of injury with that, okay? So not 100%, but 10% of people are going to get some kind of serious injury from that. For me, that's way too high. Once again, pulling these numbers kind of out of thin air, just something to keep in mind. Next, we're going to be talking about the medium high risk. And so this is something that's a bit controversial, but I think clamping is one of the most high risk exercises. A key thing about injury, when you're talking about PE exercises, it's not necessarily the exercise itself, but you have to think about how idiot-proof the exercise is. And so, I've had back and forth with M9 about this because he's like, oh yeah, clamping is perfectly safe if you do it correctly. And it's like, yeah, I get that. And it is, for the most part, safe if you do it correctly. But so many people do it incorrectly. In my own personal experience, pelvic floor injuries have been from clamping. And particularly, I'm talking about like cable clamping here. So you put the device, clamp it around it, and you leave it for, somewhere between 5 to 10 minutes. And so this does not include soft clamping, which I'll address later. But I think that clamping, especially when you're using such high pressures around your penis, it can really lead to a lot of pelvic floor issues. So one of the things that I've seen with clamping, and it's not just me personally, but I've also seen in other people's experience, is getting enough pressure, but then also making sure that you keep enough pressure to actually keep your penis engorged. And so for some people, there has to be some stimulation in order to keep enough pressure on the penis to keep it engorged. During that stimulation, Kegling happens, and that in itself is what disrupts the pelvic floor. And so this isn't going to be a how-to clamping video, but in general, I think clamping is pretty medium to high risk because I think it should be only for advanced users. It can be done safely, but it's often done incorrectly, which leads to injury. Pumping with a cock ring would be one of those other medium high risk injuries. There's actually a case report that I've posted about many times in which a guy was using a vacuum device with a cock ring in place and had permanent erectile dysfunction and permanent injury as a result. Putting a cock ring on in itself occludes the venous structures, occludes the lymphatic structures, and increases penile pressure. And then if you're pumping on top of that, that's just going to increase pressure to a much higher likelihood of dangerous levels, and that is what's going to lead to the injury as published in the case report. And I'll try to link that below for you guys to read yourself. So medium risk, so when I talk about medium high risk, the categories we just talked about, clamping and pumping with a cock ring, I think the injury risk is like 1 in 20, okay? More or less. When you talk about medium risk, when injury is like maybe 1 in 50, I think that vac extenders are overall pretty safe. My concern with extenders in general is not so much how it is done, it's that it's done for such prolonged durations. For example, a vac extender, I mean, almost every day somebody posts about a blister. It's like, well, is that an injury? Because if I'm counting that as an injury, then I would say the risk of injury is probably like 1 in 3, because almost everybody I know that's used one has had a blister at some point. But it's a temporary injury and it's mostly superficial and it's easy to recover from. But so I'm talking about more so like nerve damage or like, heaven forbid, penile fibrosis or something like that. What I don't like is that the extenders, they apply pressure at the base of the penis, and that is close to where the dorsal nerve of the penis comes out. And so if your extender is placed incorrectly or you just have unfortunate anatomy, you can be putting pressure on that dorsal nerve of the penis for multiple hours, however the duration that you're actually using the extender is. And once again, when you're using it for, see, I don't vac extend, so you guys will have to fact check me in the comments. I don't know how long like a set is before you do a break, but even if we're saying like a 30-minute set and you have your vac extender placed and the pressure is actually set too high or the vacuum is too high or you're not taped correctly, once again, we're talking about blisters, but also there's the potential for ischemic changes. If the pressure is too high and you're pulling too much blood away from some of the other like structures in the glands of the penis, you could potentially have some areas that are gonna be at a low risk of ischemic changes. In general, when you're using a vacuum, it's drawing additional blood in there. So I think that's a pretty low risk. But I have had some people that have had some nerve damage as a result of using a vacuum extender. But overall, I think it's a pretty low chance. Hydro pumps, I would include in this. Now, if you ask, now I don't want to speak for M9, but in my conversations, the far and above most common injury that he sees is with like a bath mate. I think part of that is because it's a multifactorial reason. Number one, bath mates have a phenomenal job of promotion. And so they're one of the more commonly used devices. And so the more common a device, the more common the risk of injury, okay? Not that the injury risk is higher, it's just that's what you see the most because that's what people are using the most. Number two is the hydro pump, the way it's set up, water, it basically doesn't compress, okay? So as soon as your water is ejected, there's no buffer, there's no like when you have a vacuum, an air pump, and you can kind of have some wiggle room for the pressure to adjust as you're ejecting the air. As soon as that water goes, pressure is gonna increase immediately. And so especially with the models that don't have a hand pump, when you push that bath mate down and you're squirting out the water out of the top, if you push it down too quickly, you're gonna squirt too much water out too quickly, and there's gonna be an immediate change in your actual pressure in the pump, and that is going to lead to immediate pressure changes, and that's what actually causes damage, and that's what causes injury, is that immediate pressure change. Honestly, think the fact that there's no gauge on there is less of a injury concern because that's another topic for another story. I'm going to make a separate bathmate video, but for most of the bathmate pumps, even everything basically but the hand pump, I think you can actually pump to relatively safe pressures, okay? but I think it's just that immediate pressure change that causes most of the injury with bath mate. The other thing is that when you're actually pressing in the bath mate, which I really don't like. So let's say that like this is your pubic area and your penis is coming out right here. You're pressing down right there. That's once again right on the base of the penis where the dorsal nerve of the penis is coming out over the dorsal surface of the penis. So you can literally press into that nerve with force as you are pumping out. So you're pressing in on the nerve and you're causing immediate pressure change. And that's why at least hydro pumping with a bath mate is not a good idea. At least if you don't have the hand pump. Now, if you're using a hydro pump in like the lay love or however you say it with the gauge and using like a water trap, that's a bit of a different story. But in general, the bath mate is still pretty higher risk. Bundled stretches, you know, I put that on the list. I honestly don't know of anybody that's come to me with a bundled stretching injury. What I don't like about it is that like you're not only twisting your dick, but you're also like pulling it. Is it safe? Yeah, probably. It's pretty safe. It makes me uncomfortable. I don't do it. This is just my opinion, okay? I also don't, personally, I don't know how effective it is. And this is just my kind of bias. I'm not saying it's not effective. I just don't know of any kind of logical medical-based reason why that would make sense that would be more effective. But I will tell you that I'm not fully on like the Team Tunica malleability train. And so therefore I'm kind of biased against a lot of that stuff. And so bundled stretches being one. So the medium low risk, so this we're talking about like 1 in 100. You know, it's, so I put on here hanging, and in general, I think that hanging, you know, before I started PE, I would have thought that was much riskier. But in general, if you have a good quality compression hanger and you start off slow, it is essentially a static stretch, okay? There is still the risk for ischemia, especially in the glands of the penis, or damage to the glands itself if the actual head of the compression device is not used correctly or it's not placed correctly. And I think as long as you just don't advance your weight too quickly, or you know, you're not wearing it in a situation where the actual device itself could get caught on something and pull, it's a pretty safe technique. And so there is also vac hanging, which I would include on this. The reason why I rate this lower than extenders is because you don't have that pressure on the base of the penis, okay? You don't have that compression potentially on the dorsal nerve of the penis. It's just you're pulling straight down with the vacuum hanging. When you're vacuum hanging or compression hanging, but in particular in this case, in vacuum hanging, you know, you don't have that potential loss of circulation risk because you're using a vacuum device, which is going to be bringing actually more fluid, more blood into the glands, but you do have a higher risk of blisters. So it's like, it's a give and take. I also put on here an air pump without gauge. Anytime you're pumping and you don't have a gauge, you really don't know what pressure you're using, and you don't know if you're at a dangerous level necessarily. The counterpoint to that is that most people, if it starts to hurt, they're going to stop. And so I think especially when you reach high levels of pressure, you're not just gonna be like, oh, this hurts like shit, but I'm gonna keep pumping because, you know, gains are gains. Most people are gonna stop when they're uncomfortable. Now, gradually you can build up tolerance and pressure and then potentially pump to unsafe levels if you tolerate it well. But at that point, you know, you're almost more conditioned, which is another question, is like, can you actually condition your penis to this? I think yes. But in general, an air pump without a gauge is more risky than an air pump with a gauge. Modified jelqing, I would also kind of put in this list. It's a way where you can do it, but it's a more static motion rather than like a constant movement of the pressure up your penis. It's more like a press and a hold. And then there's even things like diamond jelks, or ways that you can actually decrease pressure on the nerve and actually allow for some of the an outlet for some of that increased pressure. And so when I think of low injury risk, I think basically the lowest things that you can do are going to be pump with a gauge that has a pressure gauge that has a pressure gauge. That way you can, especially something with a hand pump, that you can slowly increase the pressure. It doesn't involve pressing into your actual pelvis. And you can see exactly what pressures that you're pumping with and know that it's in a safe level, and gradually increase. Pound for pound, and now I'm sure like all of the Thunder's Place people are gonna attack me for this, but I think pumping is hands down one of the best PE exercises. At the very least, when done correctly, you're gonna get erection quality benefits from it, and you can also gain some significant size with it. And that's a question a lot of people, honestly, it seems like a lot of people want to jog for you, and a lot of people that I've heard from Thunder's place are very anti-pumping, that it only leads to temporary gains. I'm gonna make a whole video on pumping and why I personally think it's kind of the king of PE. Because you can use it to actually prevent injuries, you can use it to recover from injuries, and you can use it to get bigger. You can use it for length exercises, or you can use it for girth exercises. But that's neither here nor there. So I think air pumping with the gauge is overall low risk. So the risk of injury is like 1 in 250, more or less. I personally also think that static manual stretches are a very low risk exercises. So I kind of go back and forth with some of the hanger people, like Ben from Male Hanger. You know, he thinks that manuals are high rates of injury. I think M9 has actually reported high rates of injury with it. The problem is that you really don't know how much pressure you are using when you do a manual stretch. And so, you know, you basically grab on your dick and you pull. And you don't know, you know, are you pulling with 5 pounds of resistance, or are you pulling with 100 pounds of resistance? I don't think it's that hard. You pull with enough pressure to extend your dick, ideally slightly past the flaccid state, not enough where it hurts. I mean, I don't get what's so hard about that. And I don't have any clients, and you know, I probably at least close to, if not at over 100 clients right now. And I haven't had them risk any injuries that way. I mean, nobody's reported to me injuries just from manual stretches. You know, I think the biggest risk with manual stretches is that you under-stimulate, and so you don't gain, and so you're pulling on your dick for 6 months and you don't get any bigger because you're not using enough pressure. The one thing with manual stretches as well is that you really have to know where you are stretching. So if you are actually pulling on the glands of your penis, you're gonna hurt yourself bad. And there's even a guy that I saw relatively recently on Getting Bigger that actually, he was pulling on his glands to the point where his glands is actually like slightly separated from his corpus cavernosum. And so that is not good. But if you pull just behind the glands, you pull with a good pressure, you know, you're not gonna hurt yourself necessarily. That being said, you know, this is not an idiot-proof exercise. So I probably should have put it in like at least the medium low risk. But I think that static stretches are a good place to start. You just pull and you just grab, not at the glands, just, you know, proximal to the glands, and pull straight down or pull to the side between the cheeks and just pull and hold. The reason why I like them also is because your sets are limited to basically how much grip strength you have in your hand. And so most people can only pull for about 30 seconds, and then they're gonna have to either switch hands or give their hand a break because they're using their grip strength to pull straight down. This allows for basically revitalizing the penis with a healthy blood flow every time you break that grip, versus like compression hanging, where you have your grip on and then it's just pulling down for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, however much it is. I mean, and same thing goes for vacuum hanging or extending or any of these exercises where there's just a constant tension on the dick. So I think it's safe. Another thing is soft clamping. And this is basically just wearing multiple cock rings for however long your set is. This is safe because there's data showing that you don't have ischemic changes in the penis. Usually for about 20 to really 30 minutes is when they actually see ischemic. Ischemia means like poor oxygenation, okay? Lack of oxygen. And so when you see those chemical signals indicating ischemia in the penis, it's normally after over 30 minutes of wearing the cock ring. So I think that soft clamping in general is safe. And I also think because it doesn't have as much pressure as when you are doing the manual clamp, a hard clamp, that it's a lower risk of injury to your pelvic floor. So even if you Kegel, when you have a soft clamp on there, you have honestly a better uniform constriction, but also I think it's a little bit more give as far as Kegling. Phalloson Forte, I think it's also safe. It's expensive as all hell, but it's been, you know, FDA approved and very low rates of injury on that. And so that one I also put in a low risk. Now, as far as the lowest risk, so things that have essentially like almost no risk of injury, or at least like less than 1 in 1,000, anything that's going to improve your erection quality is going to give you increased size, okay? It's not actually like your member is physically increasing tissue, but you're maximizing your erection. So things like citrulline, things like there's actually or arginine, for example, things that are going to increase your nitric oxide, which, you know, stay tuned, Leviathan Supplements, Leviathan Wellness is going to have something coming out. You know, these things are going to increase penile blood flow. It's going to maximize your erection quality and allow you to have, you know, larger size compared to your normal erection quality. Same thing goes for seeing things like Viagra, Cialis. Once again, nothing is without risk of injury. And so even things like citrulline can cause you something like high blood pressure. So you take 5 grams of citrulline, you're not appropriately hydrated, and you stand up too quickly and you get lightheaded and you fall over. That's an injury. Okay, what are the chances of that happening? Pretty low. Same thing goes with Cialis or Viagra. You know, there are risks associated with supplements and medications. Injeon method is another thing. You know, I don't know. It's kind of no secret that me and Janice don't really get along, but in general, are those techniques, at least the earlier techniques that don't involve like karate chopping your dick, yeah, those I think those are safe. Now, I think that's called like saber when you're trying to like mimic almost like a shockwave therapy. That's kind of a different story. That being said, I do have some clients or some people that have reached out to me who have injured themselves and has honestly been exclusively using Injeon method. I'm not gonna lie, I was surprised. I haven't had one of those in over 6 months, but there have been some people that, you know, maybe they're just prone to injury and that's happened with. That's pretty much all that I wanted to cover for today. If I missed any exercises, please leave them in the comments below. I appreciate your time watching this video. You know, any comments gonna help the algorithm. The one thing that I would ask is that just don't be a dick in the comments. You know, like I said, I'm not some PE expert savant. I'm just a guy that's done his research. I'm trying to do my own personal research based on medical journals and bring helpful information to the PE community. If there's something I got wrong, let me know. Please like and subscribe. Join us at Getting Bigger on our subreddit. And I'll catch you guys in the next one.